All right. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Once again, we are back taking a look at the tropics. Today is Sunday, September 15th, 2024. This is your afternoon tropical update. We have a new storm off the coast of the Carolinas. Potential tropical cyclone 8 was tagged by the National Hurricane Center at 5 p.m. today. And we have tropical storm warnings set for the coast of North and South Carolina with a quick moving, short-lived tropical storm moving into the Carolinas sometime tomorrow morning or early afternoon, bringing with it associated heavy weather. That's about all we have in the tropics today as far as any threats to the U.S. in the short-term window. We do have Tropical Depression Gordon lumbering around out here, but doesn't really look like it's going to go much further and should be zapped up in a couple of days by this hostile trough nearby. And then we will be watching the end of the month in the Western Caribbean. We'll talk briefly about that at the end of the video. But let's go ahead and get right into it. National Hurricane Center 5 p.m. advisory on potential tropical cyclone 8. So remember, this is our tag that we have when a storm has some winds up to tropical storm force, but we don't quite have the organization yet. So while it has 45-mile-an-hour winds, it's not exactly a tropical storm just yet. But for most intents and purposes, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, it is. So moving to the north at 7 miles per hour, our system here today just kind of lacks the organization to fully be classified. We have basically a strong high pressure to the north across the New England area. You can see the flow off that high coming across North Carolina. This is a cooler, drier air from the north. And then to the south, we have a bunch of tropical moisture associated with the leftovers of Francine, the subtropical jet, and just a lot of dry air, or rather moist air from the tropics moving up. So we have a frontal boundary kind of sitting right here, and then at the tail end of our front we have a low pressure form. This is the same thing actually that formed Francine a couple of days ago, although that was also partially a tropical wave, but don't tell anybody, it'll be our secret. But kind of the same process here that we saw last week, low pressure developing at the tail end of a stationary frontal boundary. So we have a small compact area of low pressure that's starting to become a bit more tropical. Warmer, moist air is trying to wrap around it and begin to cut itself off from those fronts. And it's going to eventually acquire some more tropical characteristics with how it's structured. And although this may not become a full tropical storm, for, again, the intents and purposes, this is going to feel like a tropical storm or like a coastal kind of nor'easter type storm when it moves in. So satellite presentation, again, low level center, probably somewhere off to the east side of this convection. All these bubbly thunderstorm tops right here indicate strong, sustained thunderstorm activity in that warm sector, but there's a lot of cool air to the north kind of helping force this aloft. So you kind of have this artificial reason the storms are firing and moving up into this region. But again, as this sits over the Gulf Stream, more moist air will wrap around, and what we'll probably see is that low-level center will kind of kick up under this cloud canopy, become one, and then move off to the northwest as one unit, and the models kind of show that as well. But this is kind of overall what we're dealing with. Hurricane hunters are out there this afternoon. They found those winds pretty decent, 45 to 55 miles per hour out there. But, again, some of that are well away from the center and just a very small swath of stronger winds closer to that low pressure center. Well defined, just not very big yet. So we'll have to see how that, goes throughout the next couple of hours. But we don't anticipate a lot of intensification with this. Hurricane Center has this moving in sometime tomorrow afternoon by 2 p.m. It looks like it's going to be on shore. They are right now forecasting a 50-mile-an-hour tropical storm at landfall. I want to point two things out. Number one, the tropical storm warnings are in effect. These are from Modesto Beach, South Carolina, just north of Beaufort, all the way up to the Outer Banks, North Carolina, and Oracoke Inlet, I think, maybe. I didn't live there long enough to know all the areas. But I'm sure a local will just spit out his drink, but is what it is. Basically, North Carolina, Outer Banks, down to about Beaufort, South Carolina. But using the Hurricane Center's experimental cone, we can see that those tropical storm warnings extend a little ways into South Carolina to some inland counties as well. While North Carolina, the winds will likely mostly be a coastal event, but this does include cities like Wilmington and Jacksonville, Camp Lejeune and whatnot, all going to be feeling the effects of this. Not a forecast to become very strong. Models show this pretty well. GFS shows that mid-level center just off to the edge of the low-level center, mid-level center about there, low stamped on the right side of that. But as we go into the next frame, overnight, this tightens up and stacks up a little bit nicer. That's when the storm will have a better chance to try to intensify a little bit. And again, I can see a small core of stronger winds with this. I mean, somewhere probably just to the north around Myrtle Beach or Wilmington, probably need to watch out for a good little hit where this comes in. I could see some pretty gusty, nasty winds coming in with that. But I want to also point out with the GFS, the broader look of how big this fetch of wind is to the north. There's a huge fetch of strong northerly winds. Remember, your high pressure is up here. So your difference in low pressure to high pressure is here. there's not nearly as much of a difference in pressure down here because this is all broadly the same pressure. So to the north of the storm is where more of these wind impacts and rain impacts are going to be, much more than the south. The rainfall forecast kind of show this perfectly, where, you know, even a city like Charleston forecast to get almost nothing in terms of rain, but up in Wilmington and Jacksonville, they're forecast to get 6 to 8 inches of rain. So that kind of illustrates, and the wind will be the same. That's where all the heaviest surf is going to be. That's where the stronger winds are going to be. So again, this corridor from like South Carolina, central South Carolina up into the Outer Banks, this is where the heaviest rain and wind are going to come in, even if the center of the storm is actually down here to the south. So kind of remember that, again, that center of circulation is not where all the impacts are located. So again, GFS moves us in pretty easily. It has it on shore by tomorrow morning as a 1,002 millibar tropical storm. That'd be about a 50, 55 mile an hour tropical storm, which I think is a pretty good call for what we're actually going to get out of this. Impacts to come. Storm surge not going to be a big threat, 1 to 3 feet in the area. I think this is more of a coastal flooding threat, especially for some of these inlets are going to have a steady easterly wind pushing in. That means tides have a hard time getting out. And then when the rain starts falling, the rain starts running out. And then you have this combined event where a lot of the coastal inlets and whatnot and the intercoastal waterways flood much worse than the beach actually floods, where you can see very little water rise at the actual coast. But then some of these interior inlets may, you know, rise quite a bit, like the New River and whatnot. So I would be much more concerned about some of the mouths of the rivers and the creeks flooding much more than I would be worried about the actual coastline flooding. And again, this threat dramatically drops off into South Carolina, where those offshore winds will not allow that water to rise much, if at all. And the storm isn't going to be a storm surge monster anyway, because it's not very big and it's not very strong, and it doesn't have much time to get that fetch of winds going. So again, the strongest surge and flooding is going to be to the north, where that really brutal onshore wind has already been going and will keep going for another couple of days until the storm moves in, or even after the storm moves in, really. So some of the other impacts still to come. Tornadoes are going to be a threat. Marginal risk from the SPC tomorrow. Most of the tornadoes will likely be along coastal North Carolina, where those winds are a little bit more deep layer in terms of the shear coming onshore. Definitely, as you get further south, the tornado threat drops off quickly to nil by the southern part of South Carolina. And rainfall still to come. Widespread flash flooding risk from the Weather Prediction Center, rather. Slight risk for now. I could see a red moderate risk being introduced by tomorrow morning. And rainfall still to come. 5 inches for Myrtle Beach, and then 5 to 6 inches across Wilmington and Jacksonville. That's probably where your highest corridor of rain will be, but there will be some isolated 8 to 10 inch totals somewhere in here. So there is a, you know, somewhat narrow but significant flash flooding risk with this storm as it moves in. So that's what I got for you guys on PTC 8. Again, going to be kind of a quick mover. Tropical storm warnings, tropical storm stuff's going to happen, especially at the coast, but don't discount that wind threat somewhere into South Carolina, and don't discount the flooding, the coastal flooding and the rainfall flooding event, as well as tornadoes for North Carolina as this moves in. Looking at the rest of the basin, again, Gordon, no threat to the eastern U.S., going to recurve harmlessly to sea and die off. No, not going to get anywhere close to land. Africa is not sending us much of anything else behind that, and we're starting to already get to the part of the season where it's less likely strong waves are going to leave Africa. And the only real threat we have going into next week is going to be a Central American gyre that should set up over here. We'll see if anything can get going, but right now it's a long shot. We're just going to be watching that, but a lot of juice will be left in the Western Caribbean and Southern Gulf of Mexico. So something could come out of the Gulf of Mexico or Western Caribbean going into probably next weekend, or even beyond that towards the end of the month. So that's what I got for you guys on your tropical update. This will be our only video on PTC 8. We'll have more routine updates on the Facebook page, and next time there's threats going, we will be back with more. So until then, as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.